It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when everything took a sharp turn towards chaos. The sun hung high in the sky, casting warm rays over our quiet neighborhood, a stark contrast to what would unfold later that day. I had just returned home from work, tired and ready to unwind, when my phone buzzed with a flurry of notifications. Sipping my coffee, I noticed some neighbors had sent messages about unusual activity near the edge of my property. Curiosity piqued, I walked outside, only to be met with an appalling sight. Karen, the woman next door, was standing defiantly by my house, clutching a pair of industrial-grade wire cutters. My heart sank as I realized what she was doing. She wasn't just trimming branches, she was severing the power lines that supplied electricity not only to my home but also to a few neighboring houses. "Karen, what are you doing?" I shouted, rushing toward her. In that moment, time seemed to freeze as the weight of her action sank in. She turned to face me, a smirk plastered on her face, clearly unfazed by the chaos she was causing. "I'm tired of you ruining this neighborhood," she shouted back, frustration seeping from her every word. The roots of our conflict stemmed from years of petty disputes, overgrown hedges, noise complaints, but never had it escalated to outright vandalism. As she triumphantly severed the final line, the lights in my home flickered and died. Cold dread gripped me. This act was not simply destructive, it felt personal. What had begun as a neighborhood squabble now threatened to plunge my entire life into disarray. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a long and arduous battle ahead. To understand the shocking incident with Karen, it's essential to delve into the rocky history that laid the groundwork for our animosity. For years, we occupied neighboring houses in a quaint, suburban block where everyone knew each other by name. Initially, our relationship seemed friendly enough. We exchanged pleasantries and shared holiday cookies, but that facade quickly faded as underlying tensions began to bubble to the surface. One of the first major conflicts arose over the fence that divided our properties. Karen insisted that my trees overhung her yard, which I vehemently denied. She began to hurl passive-aggressive comments my way, which escalated into neighborhood disputes involving increasingly furious emails about yard maintenance and noise levels during summer gatherings. I thought these trivial grievances would blow over with time, but instead, they festered and intensified. Then there were the noise complaints. I enjoyed hosting occasional barbecues and gatherings, but it seemed every celebration prompted a complaint from Karen about loud music disrupting her peace. In her eyes, I was the irresponsible neighbor who cared little for anyone else's comfort. Each disagreement chipped away at any goodwill that once existed between us, turning what was once a cordial relationship into a bitter rivalry. The tipping point came when she threatened to report me to the homeowners association over my dog barking too loudly. I dismissed her threats as another display of her pettiness, but deep down, I sensed the growing hostility turning into something more sinister. The day she cut the power lines was not just an impulsive act, it was the culmination of years of resentment boiling over. Little did I know, this long-standing battle would soon escalate beyond neighborhood squabbles and into a confrontation that neither of us could have anticipated. In the moments immediately following Karen's reckless act, chaos erupted in my household. The sudden darkness enveloped our home as the lights flickered and died, leaving us disoriented. My wife, who had just begun preparing dinner for our 2 young children, looked up in confusion. The air was thick with tension as she rushed to the living room, where our kids were playing. "Is this a power outage?" she asked, her voice tinged with both worry and disbelief. I could only nod, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach as I glanced out the window to see Karen standing triumphantly by the severed lines, oblivious to the havoc she had unleashed. As night descended, our house quickly became a scene of mounting frustration. With no electricity, our family routine was thrown into disarray. The kids grew restless without their usual activities and began to whine about their missed bedtime stories. We relied on flashlights for light, which only added to the eerie atmosphere that now permeated our home. My wife's plan for a comforting family dinner transformed into a scramble for snacks, leaving us all feeling unsettled. Beyond the immediate disruption, I felt an emotional weight bearing down on me. It wasn't just about losing power, it was the stark realization that our lives had been profoundly affected by someone else's malice. Anger simmered beneath the surface as I thought about Karen's audacity and the lengths she would go to in order to retaliate against perceived slights. The practical implications also loomed large. We had family members visiting that weekend who relied on their devices for medical needs, adding urgency to our predicament. As I hurriedly scoured my phone for emergency contacts and solutions, I couldn't shake the sense of vulnerability that her actions had inflicted upon us. Little did I know that this initial chaos was merely a prelude to an even larger confrontation ahead. While the chaos in my home unfolded, I couldn't help but wonder what had driven Karen to such a drastic measure. In her mind, she believed she was justified, and her grievances had accumulated into a boiling point that led her to sever our power lines. I recalled our last interaction, where her frustration was palpable, and I realized her perspective was steeped in a sense of injustice. Karen had always seen herself as the neighborhood protector, a self-appointed guardian of order. She viewed my gatherings as disruptive, claiming they disturbed the peace she cherished. To her, every barbecue or party was an affront to her tranquility, intensifying her perception of me as an inconsiderate neighbor. The noise complaints she filed were not mere annoyances, they were her attempts to restore balance, or so she thought. Furthermore, the ongoing dispute about our properties only deepened her resentment. The fence line issue had turned into something much larger in her mind. She was convinced that my trees were encroaching on her precious yard space, making it impossible for her to maintain her garden as she wished. Each time I dismissed her concerns, she felt unheard and invalidated, which only fueled her aggression. In her view, cutting the power lines was a desperate act of reclaiming control, a way to strike back at what she perceived as years of grievances ignored. It was a cry for attention, albeit an extreme one. As I tried to understand her rationale, it became clear that she saw herself as fighting against a perceived tyranny imposed by my family's presence in the neighborhood. While I grappled with the fallout of her actions, I couldn't shake the realization that Karen's justification stemmed from a profound sense of victimhood, a warped perspective that had twisted our once friendly neighborhood dynamic into a battleground. Little did she know, this would only escalate the conflict further, drawing us into an unavoidable confrontation. In the wake of the chaos, I was determined to find a way to address the situation with Karen without escalating tensions further. My family needed stability, and I knew that confronting her with anger would only deepen the divide. Instead, I decided to take a more diplomatic approach. The following day, I mustered the courage to knock on her door. My heart raced as I stood on her porch, rehearsing what I would say. When she answered, her expression was a mix of surprise and defensiveness. Ignoring the urge to unleash my frustration, I took a deep breath and spoke calmly. "Karen, we need to talk about what happened. This can't continue." To my surprise, she listened. I started by acknowledging her grievances, trying to validate her feelings about our past disputes. "I understand that my gatherings have been disruptive for you," I said, attempting to bridge the gap between us. "But cutting the power lines is not a solution, it just creates more problems for both of us." At first, Karen remained resistant, her walls still up. But as I continued to express my desire for a peaceful resolution and emphasized how much I valued our neighborhood, I could see a flicker of openness in her eyes. We discussed potential compromises, perhaps setting quiet hours or agreeing on boundaries for our properties that would respect her garden. Despite the tension, there was a moment of connection as we shared stories of our families and common interests. By the end of our conversation, while we hadn't reached a definitive solution, there was a glimmer of understanding. I suggested that we involve a mediator if necessary and set up regular check-ins to address any concerns before they escalated again. While it was only the beginning of mending our relationship, I left Karen's house hopeful that constructive communication could pave the way for healing rather than further conflict. Little did I know that this initial attempt at resolution would soon be put to the test in ways neither of us anticipated. Despite my hopeful conversation with Karen, the reality of her actions weighed heavily on me. The immediate chaos had subsided, but the underlying issues remained unresolved, and I knew that the damage she inflicted could not be overlooked. After discussing the situation with my wife, it became clear that we needed to consider legal action against Karen. The thought of pursuing a lawsuit was daunting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that her actions were not just reckless, they were criminal. To gather my thoughts, I began documenting everything, the timeline of events, our interactions, and any evidence that illustrated the impact of her vandalism on our family. I took photographs of the severed power lines and noted how her actions had disrupted our lives and violated our rights as homeowners. With this information in hand, I made an appointment to consult with a lawyer who specialized in property disputes and personal injury cases. Walking into the attorney's office, I felt a mix of apprehension and determination. The lawyer listened attentively as I shared my story and presented my evidence. She explained the potential legal ramifications of Karen's actions, trespassing, vandalism, and even emotional distress claims. As we discussed various legal avenues, I learned about the possibility of filing a restraining order or seeking damages for the disruption caused to our family. The idea of pursuing a $100,000 fine felt both surreal and justified. It was more than just money, it symbolized accountability for Karen's choices. After our meeting, I left feeling empowered yet conflicted. While taking legal action seemed necessary to protect my family's interests, I worried about how it would further escalate tensions in our already strained neighborhood relationship. Nevertheless, as I weighed my options, it became apparent that standing up for myself and seeking justice was imperative if we hoped to reclaim our peace. With a heavy heart but a resolute spirit, I decided to move forward with filing a lawsuit against Karen. The initial consultation with my lawyer had provided clarity on the legal avenues available, and I knew that taking this step was necessary to hold her accountable for her reckless actions. However, as I began the formal legal proceedings, the emotional toll quickly became apparent. The process was labyrinthine, filled with legal jargon that felt overwhelming at times. Filling out forms and gathering documents made me relive the traumatic events surrounding the power line incident. Each signature felt like a weight being added to my chest, reminding me of the chaos Karen had unleashed on my family. I felt a range of emotions. Anger resurfaced as I reviewed the evidence, but there was also a sense of isolation. I was now perceived as the litigious neighbor. As the lawsuit progressed, notifications from my attorney became more frequent. I found myself having to explain our situation repeatedly, recounting details I wished I could forget. The mere act of reliving the events was exhausting, and it took a toll on my family life. While my wife tried to be supportive, I could see her own frustration brewing as our home was filled with tension over what lay ahead. The anticipation of court dates loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. Would we have to face Karen in front of a judge? The thought unsettled me. Each time we received news that pushed us closer to trial, anxiety gripped me tighter. Despite these challenges, moments of solidarity with my attorney brought relief. She reassured me that seeking justice was not just about financial compensation, it was about reclaiming our sense of safety and respect within our community. Ultimately, while this journey felt daunting and fraught with uncertainty, it became clear that pursuing this lawsuit was an essential step not only for justice but also for bringing closure to my family's turmoil. The day of the trial arrived, and the atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. As I took my seat, I felt a mix of apprehension and determination. On one side, my attorney sat poised, ready to present our case against Karen, who was seated at the opposite table with her own lawyer. The judge entered, and a hush fell over the room as proceedings began. My attorney started by outlining the facts of the case, emphasizing the willful nature of Karen's actions and how cutting our power lines had not only disrupted our lives but also posed safety risks. She presented evidence, including photographs of the severed lines and documentation of my family's struggles during the outage. I could see Karen shifting uncomfortably as my attorney laid bare the significance of her vandalism. Karen's defense hinged on her perception that she was acting in response to years of grievances. She provided testimony about feeling victimized by our gatherings and claimed that my family's activities had made her home unbearable. Her emotional narrative invoked sympathy from some in the courtroom, but it also sparked disbelief in others. I could sense that her portrayal was an attempt to deflect blame rather than take responsibility for her actions. As witnesses were called, friends and neighbors testified on both sides. Some corroborated my experiences, sharing how they too had felt disturbed by Karen's complaints over trivial matters. Others came forward to support her claims about my family's noise levels. It was unsettling to hear conflicting accounts from people we once considered acquaintances, further illustrating how deeply this conflict had divided our neighborhood. The tension built as closing arguments approached. My attorney passionately reiterated that accountability was necessary not just for my family but for fostering a sense of community respect. As I watched Karen's face throughout the trial, I struggled to reconcile the woman I once knew with the neighbor who had caused so much damage. When it was finally time for deliberation, I felt exhausted yet determined. This courtroom drama had laid bare not only the facts of our case but also the fractured relationship between us and illuminated how two perspectives could diverge so completely within a shared community. After days filled with testimony, evidence, and emotional arguments, the moment of truth arrived, the judge's verdict. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the judge entered, her expression serious and contemplative. I sat on the edge of my seat, heart racing as she called for silence and began to deliver her decision. After careful consideration of the evidence presented and the testimonies from both parties, she began, "It is clear that the actions taken by Karen, cutting the power lines, constitute a willful act of vandalism." My stomach tightened at her words, sensing the weight they carried. She outlined how Karen's actions were not just impulsive, they demonstrated a disregard for the law and for my family's rights. The judge then addressed the emotional and practical implications of Karen's actions on our household. This incident led to significant disruption within the plaintiff's home, affecting their family dynamics and safety, she continued, emphasizing how my family had been plunged into chaos due to her decision. Her words resonated deeply with me, validating all of our struggles throughout this ordeal. Following her explanation, she announced the verdict, "I hereby order the defendant to pay a fine of $100,000 to the plaintiff." Gasps echoed softly in the courtroom, and I felt a rush of conflicting emotions, relief mixed with disbelief. The figure was substantial, but it felt justified given the emotional turmoil and disruption we endured. In her closing remarks, the judge reiterated the importance of community respect and accountability. No member of this neighborhood should have to live in fear of retaliation or vandalism. This ruling serves to uphold those values. As she banged the gavel to conclude the proceedings, a wave of emotion washed over me. The verdict represented more than just a financial ruling, it was a monumental step towards reclaiming our lives and restoring peace in our community. As I exited the courthouse, I realized that this fight was about more than winning a case, it was about asserting our right to live peacefully and without fear of disruption. While the road ahead would still be challenging, this victory ignited a sense of hope for my family's future. The verdict hit Karen like a freight train. As I observed her reaction in the courthouse, it was clear that the weight of the $100,000 fine had deeply unsettled her. Initially, she sat frozen in disbelief, mouth agape, as the judge's gavel struck down with finality. Soon after, once outside the courthouse, her defiance began to resurface. Karen released a stream of frustration to reporters waiting outside, claiming that she had been wronged and victimized by a biased judicial system. "This is an injustice," she declared emphatically, hands clenched at her sides. Her denial spoke volumes about her inability to accept responsibility for her actions. It was as if she would rather paint herself as the martyr than confront the reality of what she had done. In the days following the trial, I noticed a palpable change in the neighborhood atmosphere. A few residents expressed their sympathy for Karen, but many sided with my family after witnessing the chaos that ensued from her vandalism. This shift seemed to isolate Karen further, intensifying her frustration. She quickly went from being seen as a neighborhood protector to an outcast whose reputation was in tatters. Desperate to regain control over her narrative, Karen took measures that bordered on vindictive. She organized a community meeting to rally support against what she framed as neighborhood bullying. During this meeting, however, it became evident that most were wary of siding with someone who had shown such disregard for property rights and personal safety. As the financial implications of the fine began weighing on her, rumors circulated about Karen potentially selling her house or considering bankruptcy. The consequences of her actions were beginning to manifest in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her life was unraveling in more ways than one. Witnessing Karen grapple with these repercussions stirred mixed feelings within me. While I felt justified in seeking accountability, I also empathized with the profound fallout of the choices she had made. Ultimately, it became clear that the verdict not only shifted my family's fortunes but also altered Karen's life irrevocably, highlighting how a single reckless decision can have repercussions far beyond what one initially anticipates. As I reflect on the tumultuous journey that began with Karen cutting our power lines, I realize that this experience has been transformative in many ways. The conflict started as a petty neighborhood dispute but spiraled into a profound lesson about personal boundaries, accountability, and the importance of community. Initially, my reaction was fueled by anger and frustration, emotions that clouded my judgment. However, navigating through the legal process forced me to confront not only the situation at hand but also my own responses to conflict. One of the most important insights I gained was understanding the value of communication. My initial attempts to address problems with Karen were rooted in confrontation rather than dialogue. It became clear that prior resolutions to our issues could have prevented the escalation that ultimately led to her destructive actions. While seeking legal recourse was necessary, I learned that proactive communication is crucial in any relationship, even those burdened by tension. Additionally, the experience taught me about resilience and the need for self-advocacy. Standing up to Karen was not just about holding her accountable but also about reclaiming my family's peace and safety. The trial was emotionally draining, yet it underscored the importance of asserting one's rights and the necessity of having a support system. Through this ordeal, I also developed a deeper empathy for Karen, despite her misguided choices. Her actions stemmed from a complex mix of grievances and delusions of victimhood. This realization reminded me that everyone has their struggles, something I had overlooked in my quest for justice. Ultimately, this experience served as a reminder that conflicts are often multifaceted and require a nuanced understanding of all parties involved. As I move forward, I carry these lessons with me, hopeful that they will guide not only my future interactions with neighbors but also other relationships in life. The road ahead may still be challenging, but armed with newfound wisdom, I feel equipped to navigate whatever comes next. As I contemplate the aftermath of the conflict with Karen, it becomes evident that the incident will undeniably shape our future interactions. The once cordial neighborly relationship has been irrevocably altered, and while the tension may never fully dissipate, I recognize the potential for a new dynamic to emerge. Moving forward, I anticipate that our encounters will be marked by a cautious awareness of each other's presence. The previous familiarity has transformed into an uncomfortable awareness. We are now two people who have experienced the depths of conflict and the challenge of resolution. I am committed to maintaining a respectful distance, yet I also recognize the importance of remaining open to dialogue in case further misunderstandings arise. This experience has profoundly changed my perspective on conflict resolution. I've learned that addressing issues head-on, rather than allowing grievances to fester, is essential for fostering a healthy community environment. It has become clear to me that proactive communication can prevent future disputes from escalating to destructive levels. The lessons learned extend beyond just my relationship with Karen. They resonate throughout our neighborhood. With many residents now aware of the consequences of unchecked conflict, there is a newfound emphasis on fostering respect and understanding within our community. I hope that this situation serves as a cautionary tale, prompting others to engage in open dialogue before issues spiral out of control. While I wish things could have been different, I also recognize that growth often comes from hardship. The experience has instilled in me a greater sense of empathy, not just for my own family but for Karen as well. Understanding her motivations allows me to approach future interactions with compassion rather than animosity. In essence, this incident has transformed not only how I view Karen but also how I engage with my community as a whole. Armed with these insights, I am hopeful that navigating future relationships will be grounded in mutual respect and understanding, allowing us all to coexist more harmoniously moving forward.